wizard's first spellbook, a ring inherited from a beloved mentor, a crown won in battle. The item undergoes weeks or months of preparation, bathed in the blood of intelligent creatures, inscribed with runes that must be carved by tools made from the bones of willing sacrifices, and infused with necromantic energy through rituals that would make seasoned necromancers queasy. The smartest liches hide their phylacteries with paranoid precision. Tesseract, one of the most infamous liches in D&D history, built an entire death-trap dungeon, the Tomb of Horrors, partially to conceal his phylactery. Others bury theirs at the bottom of oceans, seal them in extra-dimensional spaces, or even place them in the astral plane where time doesn't flow normally. Some liches create false phylacteries to mislead would-be destroyers, watching with amusement as adventurers waste years tracking down decoys while the real artifacts sit safely elsewhere. But the phylactery demands a terrible price. It requires feeding. A lich must regularly trap souls within their phylactery to maintain their existence. The frequency varies by source. Some texts suggest weekly feedings, others monthly. And the most generous interpretations suggest liches can go years between meals if powerful souls are consumed. These souls must come from sentient creatures killed specifically for this purpose. The lich doesn't need to perform the killing personally. A network of cultists or undead servants can handle the harvest. But the murders must occur within range of the phylactery for the soul to be properly captured and consumed. The feeding process itself is disturbingly simple. When a sentient creature dies near the phylactery, the lich, or the phylactery itself if properly attuned, performs a brief ritual that tears the departing soul from its journey to the afterlife and traps it within the phylactery. The soul is then slowly consumed, dissolved into pure energy that sustains the lich's connection to undeath. The process is irreversible. Once fed to a phylactery, the soul cannot be resurrected or retrieved. It's simply gone, denied any afterlife, obliterated to fuel a lich's immortality. This is why nearly every religion and moral philosophy condemns lichdom. It's not just murder, it's metaphysical annihilation. This creates a grim arithmetic. Even a benevolent lich who feeds only once per year still requires the death of an innocent every 12 months, forever. Over centuries, that's thousands of murders. This soul consumption is why nearly all liches register as evil regardless of their original intentions or current actions. The act of feeding phylacteries inherently corrupts through accumulated murder. Many liches who began their immortal existence with noble intentions eventually become monsters, simply through the accumulated weight of necessary evils. Each feeding slightly dulls their emotional responses, making the next death easier to rationalize. Within a few centuries, even lichdoms who once treasured life view mortal creatures as little more than cattle, mobile soul containers to be harvested when convenient. When a wizard becomes a lich, their body doesn't simply die and reanimate. It transforms into something that was never meant to exist, a corpse animated by will alone, sustained by necromantic energy rather than biological processes. The lich becomes a conduit for negative energy, drawing power directly from the negative energy plane itself. This connection makes them fundamentally different from living creatures. They exist in opposition to life, a wound in reality that persists through sheer magical will. The flesh withers and desiccates, pulling tight against bones until the face becomes a skull, wrapped in parchment-thin skin. Eyes sink into their sockets, sometimes replaced by pinpoints of cold light, red, green, or sickly blue depending on the specific energies that power the transformation. Hair falls out or becomes brittle and white. The teeth remain, often the most well-preserved feature, giving every lich a perpetual death's head grin. The body no longer needs food, water, air, or sleep. Pain becomes a distant memory. The liches retain enough sensation to interact with the physical world. They don't feel temperature unless it's extreme enough to damage their form. Many liches dress in elaborate robes or armor, partially to hide the horror of their appearance, but mostly because the garments serve as a reminder of their former life, a memorial to the person they used to be before they chose power over humanity. The transformation does grant incredible advantages. Liches become immune to disease, poison, and most forms of physical damage. Crushing their windpipe accomplishes nothing since they don't breathe. Piercing their heart has no effect since it stopped beating centuries ago. They can stand at the bottom of the ocean or in the vacuum of the astral plane without discomfort. Even turn undead, the cleric's primary weapon against lesser undead, has little effect. A lich's willpower and magical power make them extremely resistant to such attempts. Time becomes their ally rather than their enemy. Where mortal wizards must frantically cram decades of research into lifespans that end too soon, liches have centuries or millennia to perfect their craft. A 3,000-year-old lich has spent more time practicing magic than most mortal civilizations have existed. They've forgotten more spells than most archmages will ever learn. Their spell repertoire might include magic from fallen empires, techniques developed through centuries of experimentation, and combinations that no living wizard has ever considered. They cast with perfect efficiency, every gesture precise, every syllable clear, because they perform these spells thousands of times. A typical lich's prepared spells read like a nightmare catalog: power word kill for instant execution, finger of death to simultaneously kill and create undead servants, time stop to take multiple turns while enemies stand frozen, counterspell ready to shut down enemy casters, dimension door or teleport for instant escape, wall of force to control the battlefield, disintegrate for enemies that won't stay dead, dominate person to turn the party's fighter against them. Many keep clone spells prepared, creating backup bodies hidden across the world. Older liches have contingency plans layered upon contingencies, sequestered clones activating if the primary body fails. Gesh spells binding servants to seek revenge, symbols of death carved into their phylactery chambers to kill anyone who gets close. Fighting a lich isn't like battling a mortal wizard, it's like fighting magic itself given form and malevolent will. In game terms, liches typically represent endgame threats. A standard lich sits around challenge rating 21, making them appropriate opponents for parties of 17th level or higher. But that rating assumes the party fighting a lich on neutral ground with no preparation. A lich in their own lair with centuries of prepared defenses, surrounded by undead servants, and fighting on terrain they've shaped to their advantage. That same lich effectively doubles in difficulty. Ancient liches that have existed for millennia might be effectively impossible to defeat through direct combat, require complex strategies, multiple sessions of preparation, and often significant party casualties. The undead nature also grants spell-like abilities separate from their spellcasting. Most liches radiate an aura of fear that sends mortals fleeing in panic. Their touch can paralyze, leaving victims frozen and aware while the lich decides their fate. Some develop the ability to possess living bodies, riding inside mortal flesh when they need to move through society undetected. Their gaze can inflict disease or madness. Unlike vampires or most undead that retain some connection to their living nature, liches are purely magical constructs animated by necromantic will, making them far harder to destroy. Few liches work alone. Their paranoia combined with the practical need to maintain their phylactery and conduct research drives them to surround themselves with servants. The most common are undead, creatures that can't betray you because they have no will of their own. Zombies and skeletons handle menial labor, tireless workers that never complain about spending decades moving stones or copying texts. More intelligent undead like wights, wraiths, and vampire spawns serve as lieutenants, capable of independent action while bound to the lich's will through necromantic control. But undead servants have limitations. They're obvious, making covert operations difficult. They can't innovate or adapt to unexpected situations. They tend to decay without regular maintenance. This drives many liches to recruit living servants as well. Cultists who worship the lich as a god, mercenaries who value gold over morality, or specialists whose skills the lich needs. The lich might employ living scribes to copy books, since undead fingers lack the fine motor control for calligraphy, living merchants to acquire rare materials, or living spies to infiltrate organizations that would destroy undead on sight. The relationship between liches and their living servants ranges from purely transactional to genuinely symbiotic. Some liches treat their servants as disposable tools, discarding them when convenient. Others develop strange forms of affection. Not love exactly, since emotional capacity is decayed, but appreciation for useful tools combined with curiosity about moral behavior. The lich might keep the same human servant for their entire natural life, then reanimate them as an intelligent undead to continue their service. Whether this constitutes honor or horror depends on your perspective. The most powerful lich servants are other spellcasters, necromancers who study under the lich hoping to one day achieve lichdom themselves, clerics of death gods who view the lich as a holy figure, or or simply pragmatic wizards who recognize that serving an immortal archmage offers access to knowledge unavailable anywhere else. These apprentices perform the delicate work, maintaining magical defenses, conducting research under the Lich's direction, and handling situations that require subtlety or social skills the Lich no longer possesses. Even immortality has stages. When a Lich grows so old and powerful that they lose interest in maintaining even their undead body, they can transform into a demi-Lich, essentially a floating skull with gemstones set in the eye sockets and teeth, radiating power that makes their Lich form look weak by comparison. This transformation usually occurs after millennia of existence. The Lich grows bored with the material world, spending centuries at a time in deep meditation or research into planes and magic so esoteric that mortal minds literally cannot comprehend them. Their bodies begin to crumble from sheer neglect. First the extremities, fingers and toes falling away like dried leaves. Then limbs, torso, and finally everything except the skull. The phylactery remains intact, now typically fused with the skull itself, or hidden somewhere even more secure since the Demi-Lich has had thousands of years to perfect their defenses. Demi-Liches possess abilities that make standard Liches look like apprentices. Asarak, the most famous Demi-Lich, can trap the souls of attackers in the gemstone set in his skull's eye sockets and teeth. Each gem functioned as a miniature phylactery, and destroying Asarak required first freeing or destroying every trapped soul. And there were often dozens of adventurers already imprisoned when new heroes arrived. Some Demi-Liches develop the ability to project their consciousness across multiple planes simultaneously, conduct research in the far realm while simultaneously conversing with a visitor in their tomb, or cast multiple high-level spells as a single action. Demi-Liches rarely care about the mortal world anymore. They're so far beyond human concerns that unless you directly threaten them or their research, they'll ignore you completely. But if you do attract their attention, you're facing a creature that has spent tens of thousands of years perfecting the art of murder through magic. Asarak built entire dungeons as intellectual exercises, death traps so lethal that the Tomb of Horrors kills experienced adventurers in its very first room, and continues slaughtering them for the next 50 rooms until the survivors finally reach Asarak himself, at which point the real difficulty begins. So what does this immortality cost? Every Lich pays a price beyond the obvious. The transformation doesn't just kill the body, it completely alters the mind and soul. Emotions dull over time, becoming distant and abstract. A newly made Lich might still feel anger, joy, fear, or love with something approaching their mortal intensity. But after a century, these feelings begin to fade. After a millennia, they become intellectual concepts rather than visceral experiences. The Lich remembers being afraid but can no longer truly feel fear. They recall what it meant to love someone but can't quite recapture the sensation. The emotional decay creates a terrible isolation. Even Liches who maintain regular contact with living beings find themselves increasingly disconnected from mortal concerns. A Lich might intellectually understand that destroying a village causes suffering, but they no longer feel empathy for that suffering. The deaths become statistics, abstract data points rather than tragedies. Many Liches who begin their immortal existence with good intentions gradually become monsters, not through active malevolence, but through simple emotional atrophy. They stop caring about mortals the way we stop caring about individual ants, not from cruelty, but from a fundamental inability to connect with something so far beneath our scope of existence. The isolation compounds over centuries. Mortal friends die. Former allies age and pass away. Anyone the Lich once loved turns to dust while they remain unchanged. Some Liches try to create new connections, but the lifespan difference makes relationships inherently temporary. You can't truly befriend someone when you know they'll be dead within the next few decades, while you continue living on for millennia. This drives many Liches to surround themselves exclusively with other undead or immortal beings. Creatures who share their temporal perspective, even if they remain fundamentally alone. Then there's the hunger. The need to feed souls to the phylactery never ends, creating a cycle of murder that taints even the most well-intentioned Lich. Each feeding requires planning, execution, and the aftermath of healing from death. Some Liches attempt to make the process humane, targeting criminals or those who volunteered for the honor. But the end result remains the same. The body count climbs year after year, century after century, until even keeping track becomes impossible. How do you reckon with being responsible for 50,000 deaths, 100,000? Some liches simply stop counting, viewing the murders as a necessary resource extraction no different from mining ore or harvesting timber. The varieties of undeath. Not all liches are equal. The standard lich is terrifying enough, but D&D lore includes several variants that demonstrate just how much worse immortal undeath can become. The Arch-Lich represents the rare example of a lich who retained their moral compass. These creatures undergo the transformation for genuinely noble purposes, typically good-aligned wizards who need immortality to guard against some specific cosmic threat or preserve crucial knowledge. Arch-Liches attempt to minimize the harm caused by their existence, often targeting evil creatures for their phylactery feedings, or making deals with celestial beings to offset the negative energy they generate. But even Arch-Liches walk a razor's edge, constantly fighting against the emotional decay and isolation that makes other liches monstrous. Most fail eventually, their good intentions corroding over centuries until they become what they once opposed. The Baelnorn is the elven version, typically created by ancient elven wizards who bind themselves to guard sacred locations or bloodlines. Unlike standard liches, Baelnorns retain much of their appearance and personality, looking more like preserved elves than rotting corpses. They view lichdom as a sacred duty rather than a path to power. Elven society treats Baelnorns with reverence rather than fear. These are heroes who sacrifice their chance of peaceful death to serve their people for eternity. But even Baelnorns eventually decay, their personalities warping over millennia until the dutiful guardian becomes an obsessive, paranoid monster that destroys anyone approaching their charge, unable to distinguish between genuine threats and innocent travelers. The Draco-Lich might be the single most dangerous variant. When a dragon, already one of the most powerful creatures in existence, undergoes the Lich transformation, the result combines draconic might with undead resilience and magical mastery. The transformation usually requires the dragon's willing cooperation, though powerful necromancers have occasionally forced the transformation on captured dragons. The process involves creating a special phylactery called a Draco-Lich spirit jar and performing a ritual that kills the dragon and binds its soul to the jar, similar to standard lichdom but adapted for draconic physiology. Draco-Liches retain their physical form, draconic abilities, and often their breath weapons, now enhanced with necromantic energy. Red Draco-Lich breathes necrotic fire that both burns and withers, leaving victims as charred husks drained of life force. Unlike mortal dragons that spend much of their time sleeping, Draco-Liches never rest, pursuing their goals with tireless dedication. The Cult of the Dragon, particularly active in the Forgotten Realms, specializes in creating Draco-Liches, believing they represent the ultimate form of draconic existence. They view dragon undeath as ascension rather than a curse. The Alhoon is what happens when Mind Flayers attempt the Lich transformation, and it almost never goes well. Mind Flayer society forbids individual pursuit of lichdom, viewing it as a betrayal of the communal elder brain to which all illithids eventually join their consciousness. Alhoons are Mind Flayers who reject this fate, seeking personal immortality instead. They retain their Mind Flayer abilities, tentacles, Mind Blast, and skill at psychic magic, while gaining Lich powers, but they're hunted relentlessly by their former kin, making them paranoid, desperate creatures that hide in forgotten corners of the Underdark, plotting revenge against the society that exiled them. Liches occupy an unusual position in the undead hierarchy. Unlike vampires who typically serve vampire lords or wraiths bound to their creation sites, liches are fundamentally independent. They bow to no master unless forced through magic or mutually beneficial alliance. This independence creates both conflict and cooperation among powerful undead. Some liches form alliances with vampire lords, sharing territories and resources. Others view vampires as inferior, animated corpses that retain biological dependencies rather than transcending them entirely. Demon lords and archdevils sometimes attempt to bind liches into service, but a lich's magical power makes them difficult to control. More often, these relationships function as partnerships between equals, both parties recognizing the other's capacity for destruction. The most complex relationships exist between liches and death gods. Deities like Miracle, Velsharoon, and Weejas have varying attitudes towards lichdom. Some view liches as abominations that cheat the natural order. Others see them as exemplars of death's power over life. A lich might worship a death god, viewing their transformation as religious devotion, while that same god's church might hunt. What happens when liches meet? Liches rarely cooperate with each other. Each views themselves as the pinnacle of magical achievement, making peer relationships nearly impossible. When two liches occupy adjacent territories, the result is usually Cold War. Elaborate non-aggression pacts backed by mutually assured destruction. They maintain careful boundaries, neither wanting to expend centuries-old resources fighting another immortal who could simply reform in return for revenge. Occasionally liches form alliances, usually against a common threat powerful enough that even immortal wizards feel genuine concern. These partnerships are built on mutual benefit and maintained through constant surveillance. Each party assumes the other will betray them the moment it becomes advantageous. Some ancient liches belong to loose organizations like the Cult of the Dragon or the Red Wizards of Thay. But even with these groups, every lich pursues their own agenda. The exceptions are lich mentors and apprentices. An ancient lich might take a younger one under their wing, teaching advanced techniques in exchange for service. But even these relationships are transactional. The mentor gains a powerful servant, the apprentice gains knowledge. Genuine friendship between liches is so rare that documented cases are legendary, usually involving liches who knew each other as immortals before their transformations. The legendary liches. Some liches transcend mere villainy to become legendary threats whose names carry weight across multiple campaign settings in addition. Ossurak remains the gold standard by which all other liches are measured. Originally introduced in the Tomb of Horrors adventure, Ossurak built what might be the single most lethal dungeon in D&D history. A death trap so brutal that it killed multiple parties in the first room and continued murdering adventurers for another 50 before they even reached the Demi-Lich himself. Ossurak designed the tomb not to guard treasure or protect his phylactery, but purely as an intellectual exercise in lethality. He wanted to see how effectively he could kill powerful adventurers using architectural design, mundane traps, magical hazards, and carefully placed monsters. The entire structure serves as a monument to his contempt for mortal life and his genius for inflicting death. Players who survived the Tomb of Horrors often did so with extreme caution, massive resource expenditure, and sheer luck. Those who reached Ossurak himself faced a creature that could trap souls in gemstones, cast multiple spells per round, and regenerate constantly while immune to most damage types. His reputation alone has terrorized D&D players for decades. Vecna represents ambition taken to its ultimate conclusion. Not content with mere lichdom, Vecna ascended to godhood through a combination of necromantic research, betrayal, and strategic murder spanning centuries. He's so powerful that even pieces of him are legendary, specifically his hand and eye, which became powerful artifacts that gave terrible power to those foolish enough to use them. The hand and eye of Vecna require severing your own hand or eye and replacing the Vecna's with it remains, which then bond with you and begin slowly transforming you into Vecna's servant. Despite achieving godhood, Vecna remains fundamentally a lich at heart. Paranoid, secretive, obsessed with hidden knowledge, and plotting against every other deity in the pantheon. His cult views lichdom as a sacred path to enlightenment rather than a descent into monstrosity. Zast Tam rules Thay, one of Faerun's most powerful nations, as its lich king. He's led the Red Wizards for over 2 centuries, transforming a kingdom known for slavery and necromancy into something even darker. Zast Tam represents what happens when a lich